Arthur Hart's hands were covered in earth, and that was exactly how he liked it. He knelt in the garden of the Hastings estate, carefully pruning the rose bushes that bordered the eastern terrace. The mansion loomed behind him, all white columns and old money, but Arthur barely noticed. He was focused on the thorns. His wife, Catherine Hart, had laughed when he took this job 3 years ago. From demolitions expert to gardener, she'd said, kissing his scarred knuckles. Arthur, you're full of surprises. But Catherine understood. She'd been there during the dark years after he left the French Foreign Legion. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the feeling that his hands were only good for breaking things. The garden had saved him. Soil was forgiving. Plants grew if you treated them right. Nothing exploded unless you wanted it to. Preston Hastings appeared on the terrace, coffee in hand. The judge was in his late 50s, silver-haired and perpetually exhausted. Arthur, morning. Those roses look magnificent. Thank you, sir. They'll bloom full in about 2 weeks. Preston's son, 17-year-old Calvin Hastings, slouched out behind his father. The kid had his father's sharp features, but none of his gravitas. He was on his phone, barely acknowledging Arthur's existence. Calvin had gotten into trouble recently, a DUI, partying with the wrong crowd, but Preston had used his connections to keep it quiet. Calvin, we need to talk about your college applications, Preston said. Later, Dad. Calvin brushed past his father and headed toward his BMW. I'm meeting friends. Arthur watched the interaction with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years reading people under stress. Preston wasn't just tired, he was worried. The judge had been different lately, more guarded. Arthur had noticed increased security around the estate, new cameras, a tension in Preston's shoulders that hadn't been there before. Everything all right, Judge? Arthur asked. Preston forced a smile. Just work stress. I'm presiding over a difficult case. Rogelio Cunningham trial. You probably heard about it on the news. Arthur had. Rogelio Cunningham was the head of a drug cartel that had expanded from Mexico into Texas over the past decade. The trial had been sensational, multiple murders, drug trafficking, witness intimidation. Preston had been the one to deny bail and push for maximum sentencing. That's a heavy case, Arthur said carefully. Someone has to stand up to these animals, Preston said, his jaw tightening. The jury convicted him yesterday. Sentencing is next week. I'm giving him life, no parole. Arthur nodded, but something cold settled in his stomach. He'd dealt with men like Cunningham during his Legion days, brutal, connected, and vengeful. Men who didn't accept losing. That afternoon, Arthur went home to the small cottage he and Catherine rented in town. She was grading papers at the kitchen table. She taught high school English, and looked up when he entered. You look troubled, she said, setting down her red pen. The Hastings case. Judge is sentencing the cartel leader next week. Catherine's expression darkened. She'd been a military journalist before teaching, and she understood the implications. Does Preston have protection? Some. But Arthur. He sat down heavily. Men like Cunningham don't threaten. They act. 3 nights later, Arthur was finishing his evening rounds of the garden when his phone rang. It was nearly midnight, and Catherine's name flashed on the screen. Arthur, turn on the news. Now. He pulled out his tablet, navigating to the local news site. The headline made his blood run cold. Judge's son missing. Abduction suspected in Cunningham case. Arthur sprinted to his truck and drove to the Hastings estate. Police cars filled the driveway, their lights painting the mansion in alternating red and blue. He found Preston in his study, surrounded by FBI agents and local police. The judge looked like he'd aged 10 years. Arthur, Preston said when he spotted him. You shouldn't be here. I'm here anyway. What happened? A female FBI agent, who introduced herself as Special Agent Ruth Grimes, explained. Calvin had been at a party in downtown Austin. Security footage showed him leaving around 10 p.m. His car was found abandoned near the university, driver's door open, phone on the ground. There were signs of a struggle. Mr. Hart, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Agent Grimes said. This is an active investigation. Arthur was about to argue when Preston's phone rang. The room fell silent. Preston's hand shook as he answered. He put it on speaker. A distorted voice came through. Judge Hastings, you made a mistake. Where's my son? Preston's voice cracked. Alive. For now. But he's very scared. There was a rustling sound, and then Calvin's voice, raw with terror. Dad. Dad. Please, they're going to. A scream. The sound of something heavy hitting flesh. Calvin's sobbing filled the room. 24 hours, Judge. The distorted voice continued. Reverse the Cunningham verdict. Call it a mistrial. Get creative. Or we start mailing you pieces of your son. One limb at a time. The line went dead. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Agents were tracing the call, discussing tactical options. But Arthur could see the truth in their faces. They had nothing. No leads, no location, in less than a day. Preston collapsed into his chair, his face in his hands. I can't let them hurt him. But if I reverse the verdict, Cunningham walks, and everything we worked for. Arthur knelt beside the judge. His mind was already working, shifting into the methodical planning mode he'd honed in a dozen war zones. Judge, listen to me. The FBI will do their best, but these people are careful. They've done this before. So what do I do? Arthur thought of Catherine, of the quiet life they'd built, of the promise he'd made to leave violence behind. But he also thought of Calvin, stupid, spoiled, but just a kid. And he thought of men like Cunningham, who believed they were untouchable. I need you to trust me, Arthur said quietly. Can you do that? Preston looked at him, seeing something in Arthur's eyes that made him straighten. Who were you before you were my gardener? Someone who found people who didn't want to be found, and dealt with problems that couldn't be dealt with officially. Arthur stood. I can get Calvin back, but I need full access to everything. Your records, security footage, any information about Cunningham's organization. Agent Grimes stepped forward. Mr. Hart, I can't allow. Agent, with respect, you have less than 24 hours and 0 leads, Arthur said. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling Judge Hastings what his options are. Preston looked between them, then made his decision. Arthur has full access to everything. Agent Grimes, I appreciate the FBI's efforts, but I'm also exploring alternative solutions. Arthur spent the next 3 hours in Preston's study, poring over files while agents came and went. Catherine arrived sometime after 2 a.m., having driven straight from their cottage. You're going after him, she said. It wasn't a question. I have to. She squeezed his hand. I know. But Arthur, if you go back to that world, I'm not going back to anything. I'm just using old skills for a good reason. Catherine pulled out her own laptop. Then let me help. I still have contacts from my journalism days. People who know things that don't make the news. Together, they built a profile. Rogelio Cunningham's organization was sophisticated, but it had patterns. Arthur identified 3 key members of Cunningham's inner circle who weren't in custody. Jared Cunningham, Rogelio's younger brother and the cartel's enforcer, Steve Perkins, their logistics coordinator, and a woman named Miranda Cunningham, Rogelio's daughter, who ran their money operations. Catherine worked her contacts and found something interesting. Arthur, look at this. 3 days before Calvin was taken, a man named Hugo Morgan rented a warehouse property in Del Valle. It's registered to a shell company, but my source traced it back to Perkins. Arthur studied the address. Del Valle was 20 miles southeast of Austin, rural enough for privacy, but close enough for quick access. That's it. That's where they're holding him. You can't be sure, Agent Grimes said. She'd been monitoring their work. We need warrants, surveillance, tactical planning. You don't have time for that, Arthur said. They're going to move him, or worse, as soon as it's light. This has to be tonight. He turned to Preston. Judge, I need you to make a call. Tell them you're considering the mistrial. By me until dawn. Preston nodded numbly and made the call. The distorted voice sounded pleased. Smart choice, Judge. We'll be in touch with details. Arthur left the mansion at 3 a.m. Catherine insisted on driving him. I'm not going in, she said, but I'll be your backup. Communication, getaway if needed. Like old times, he said. No, she corrected. Old times, we both went in. Now you have something to come back to. Arthur loaded his truck with supplies. He'd kept certain items from his Legion days, hidden in a locked case beneath their garage floor. Tactical gear, a suppressed pistol, flashbangs, tools for breaching doors and cutting chains, and his knife, a Legion issue blade that had saved his life more times than he could count. He also grabbed something else, components for an improvised explosive device. Not to kill, but to create chaos. It was what he'd done in the Legion, demolitions, breaching, controlled destruction. He might be a gardener now, but his hands remembered the old dances. As Catherine drove toward Del Valle, Arthur made a call to an old contact. Claude, It's Arthur Hart. Yeah, it's been a while. I need information on a warehouse in Del Valle. He listened, then nodded. 3 guards, 2 vehicles. Perfect. Your old network still works, Catherine observed. Some people don't retire. They just wait for the right call. They parked a mile from the warehouse. Arthur geared up, checking his equipment with practiced efficiency. Catherine handed him a comm unit. Channel 7. I'll monitor police bands and warn you if anything changes. He kissed her, tasting fear and determination on her lips. If I'm not back in 2 hours, drive away and tell Agent Grimes where I went. Like hell I will. Arthur smiled grimly and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. The warehouse was a corrugated metal structure surrounded by overgrown fields. Arthur approached from the east, using the tall grass for cover. 2 vehicles were parked outside, a black SUV and a white van. Light leaked from under the main door, and he could see shadows moving inside. He circled the perimeter, counting windows and possible entry points. The Legion had taught him patience, hours spent observing, understanding patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. But he didn't have hours. He had maybe 90 minutes before sunrise, and these men would expect dawn to bring either a mistrial announcement or the need to follow through on their threat. Arthur found what he was looking for, a ventilation shaft on the north side, partially obscured by dead brush. He pried off the grate and squeezed inside, his body remembering how to move silently through confined spaces. The shaft led him above the main warehouse floor. Through the metal slats, he could see the layout. Calvin was tied to a chair in the center of the room, blindfolded and gagged. The kid was terrified but appeared unharmed. 3 men were present. A young, muscular man with tattoos covering his arms, likely Jared Cunningham, an older, heavy-set man in a suit, Steve Perkins, and a guard with an AR-15. Jared was pacing, phone in hand. The judge better come through. I'm not sitting on this kid another day. Rogelio wants him alive until the verdict is reversed, Perkins said nervously. After that, we dump him somewhere quiet. If the judge doesn't play ball, I want first crack at the kid, Jared said. Make him scream like he did on the phone. That was beautiful. Arthur's jaw tightened. These weren't just criminals following orders. They were enjoying this. The guard moved toward the door. I'm checking the perimeter. Perfect. Arthur waited until the guard exited, then moved silently through the ventilation shaft to a position above the exit. When the guard stepped outside, Arthur dropped through an access panel and landed behind him. A precise chokehold, pressure on the carotid arteries, and the guard slumped unconscious in 8 seconds. Arthur zip-tied his hands and feet, gagged him, and dragged him into the brush. 1 down, 2 to go. Arthur returned to the warehouse and studied the situation. The front door was the obvious entry, but it would give them time to react, possibly harm Calvin. He needed a distraction, something that would separate them and give him control. He pulled out the components from his pack and assembled a small flashbang device, setting it on a 30-second delay. He placed it near the white van, then moved to the entrance. The explosion wasn't large, but in the quiet night, it was deafening. The van's windows shattered, and flames licked at its tires. Jared and Perkins rushed outside, guns drawn. Arthur slipped inside and went straight to Calvin. He cut the bindings and removed the gag. Calvin, it's Arthur. I'm getting you out. Calvin's eyes went wide with recognition. Arthur? But how? Later. Can you run? I think so. Then run. East through the fields. My wife is waiting a mile out with a truck. Go. Calvin stumbled toward the exit, and Arthur turned to face the returning captors. Jared entered first, his weapon up, searching for targets. Arthur let him pass, then struck from behind, a precise blow to the kidney, followed by a takedown. Jared's gun clattered away, and Arthur had his knife at the man's throat. Where's the girl? Miranda? Arthur demanded. What girl? Man, you're dead. Arthur pressed the blade deeper. Where? Austin. She's in Austin, at the Driscoll Hotel, room 807. Don't kill me. Arthur struck him unconscious and zip-tied him. Perkins burst in, gun raised, but Arthur was already moving. He threw his knife, and it buried itself in Perkins's shoulder. The man screamed and dropped his weapon. Arthur closed the distance, disarmed him completely, and left him bleeding but alive. You're going to call the FBI? Arthur told Perkins. You're going to tell them exactly where you are? And you're going to pray that makes them go easier on you. Arthur retrieved Calvin's phone from a table and found the number they'd used to call Preston. He dialed it. The distorted voice answered. "Judge?" "Not the judge," Arthur said. "Your operation is done. Your men are down. Calvin Hastings is safe. And Rogelio Cunningham is never walking free." "Who the hell is this?" "A gardener. Tell Miranda Cunningham she has 12 hours to turn herself in before I come for her too. And tell Rogelio his brother sends his regards." Arthur ended the call and left the warehouse. He found Calvin vomiting in the grass, adrenaline and terror catching up with him. Arthur helped him to his feet. "Come on, kid. Let's get you home." Catherine's truck was waiting where she'd promised. She took one look at Calvin and wrapped a blanket around him. "You're safe now. We're taking you to your father." The drive back to the estate was quiet. Calvin stared out the window, processing his ordeal. "Arthur," he finally said, "who were you?" "I mean, before." "Someone who built things and broke things in bad places," Arthur replied. "But that was a long time ago. You saved my life. I did my job." They arrived at the estate to chaos. FBI vehicles everywhere, agents mobilizing. Agent Grimes met them at the door, her expression a mixture of relief and anger. "Mr. Hart, you can't just—" "The warehouse in Del Valle," Arthur interrupted. "3 suspects in custody, including Jared Cunningham. You'll want to move fast." Preston ran from the house and embraced Calvin, both of them crying. Arthur stepped back, letting the moment be theirs. Catherine took his hand, and they started to leave. "Arthur, wait," Preston called. I don't know how to thank you. Keep your son safe. That's thanks enough." But as they drove away, Arthur felt the familiar itch of unfinished business. He'd told Miranda Cunningham she had 12 hours to surrender. He knew she wouldn't. Men and women like the Cunninghams didn't surrender, they retaliated. "You're thinking about the daughter," Catherine said. "If we don't stop her, she'll come after Preston. Or Calvin. Maybe even us. So what do we do?" Arthur was quiet for a moment. "We finish it. Properly this time." They went home and Arthur showered, washing away the night's violence. When he emerged, Catherine had her laptop open. The journalist instincts activated. "I found something. Miranda Cunningham isn't just running the money. She's been the brains behind the whole organization since her father was arrested. Phone records show she coordinated Calvin's kidnapping." "The Driscoll Hotel, room 807, Arthur said. "That's where Jared said she was. That was 4 hours ago. She could be anywhere by now." But Arthur was already making calls. His Legion contact, Claude, had connections throughout Texas. "I need eyes on Miranda Cunningham. Last known at the Driscoll in Austin." "Yes, I'll wait." 5 minutes later, she's still there. "But Arthur, she's not alone. She's meeting with someone named Wallace Fry. He's a corrupt DEA agent who's been on the cartel payroll for years. They're planning something." Arthur looked at Catherine. "How good are you at playing a role?" "Depends on the role. Wealthy couple looking to do business with the wrong people. Can you sell it?" Catherine smiled dangerously. "I've convinced dictators to give me interviews. I can handle a drug dealer." Arthur and Catherine dressed the part, expensive clothes borrowed from his old network, the kind of outfits that screamed money and moral flexibility. They entered the Driscoll Hotel at noon, confident and unhurried. Arthur had called ahead using a burner phone, claiming to represent investors interested in expanding the Cunningham operations reach. The lure was simple: money and connections in exchange for product and protection. Miranda, desperate to rebuild after her brother's capture, had taken the bait. They were directed to the hotel bar. Miranda Cunningham sat in a corner booth, late 30s, immaculately dressed, with cold calculation in her eyes. Beside her was Wallace Fry, a DEA agent gone bad, his face showing the wear of a man living double lives. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," Miranda said as they approached, using the aliases Arthur had provided. "You're very confident, requesting this meeting so openly." "Confidence comes from capability," Arthur said, sitting down. Catherine slid in beside him, her posture perfect. "We represent a consortium interested in expanding operations into the Pacific Northwest. But we need reliable partners. Your organization has the infrastructure we require." "Had," Miranda corrected bitterly. "Thanks to Judge Hastings and whoever destroyed our operation last night." "You've heard about that." "We heard your brother was arrested," Catherine said smoothly. "But organizations are bigger than one person, aren't they?" Miranda studied them. "You're either very brave or very stupid. The FBI is watching everyone associated with us. The FBI, Wallace Fry interjected, is watching who I tell them to watch. And right now, I've directed their attention elsewhere. Arthur leaned forward. We're not interested in your family drama, Miss Cunningham. We want to know if you can deliver product and maintain operational security. Can you? Miranda's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. She showed the screen to Fry. It was a news alert. Jared Cunningham cooperating with authorities. That lying. Miranda stood abruptly. We need to leave. Now. Miss Cunningham, Arthur said calmly, sit down. Your brother cooperating changes nothing for us. Unless you're not the leader you claim to be. The challenge worked. Miranda sat, but her hand moved to her purse. Arthur saw the outline of a gun. Catherine saw it too and placed her hand over Miranda's, her voice honey-sweet and threatening at once. Let's not make a scene in this lovely hotel. What do you want? Miranda hissed. The truth, Arthur said, dropping the pretense. Your father ordered Calvin Hastings kidnapped. Your brother executed it. And you coordinated everything. You're not a businesswoman. You're a thug who hurt a kid to help your daddy. Recognition dawned in Miranda's eyes. You're the one who took my brother down. Wallace Fry reached for his service weapon, but Arthur was faster. Under the table, he'd been holding a taser. He hit Fry with enough voltage to incapacitate without causing a scene. The agent slumped forward, appearing drunk to casual observers. Miranda tried to stand, but Catherine's grip on her wrist tightened, years of self-defense training making her stronger than she looked. You're going to sit quietly, Catherine said, while my husband explains your options. Arthur leaned in close. Option 1. You run. But the FBI knows everything your brother told them. You'll be in custody within a week. Option 2. You try something stupid, and I make sure everyone knows you're the weak link who destroyed your father's empire. How long do you think you'd last with a target on your back? What's option 3? You turn yourself in. Tonight. You cooperate fully. And maybe, just maybe, you spend your 30s in prison instead of a grave. Miranda laughed bitterly. You think I'm afraid of prison? I think you're afraid of irrelevance, Arthur said. Your father built an empire, and you've spent your life trying to prove you're worthy of it. But you're not a builder, Miranda. You're a destroyer. And destroyers always burn themselves eventually. For a moment, something flickered in Miranda's eyes. Doubt. Maybe even shame. But then it hardened again. I won't make this easy for you. I didn't expect you to. Arthur stood, and Catherine released Miranda's wrist. Agent Fry will wake up with a headache and no memory of the last 10 minutes. You can run if you want. But every agency in Texas is looking for you now. Your brother made sure of that. They walked away, leaving Miranda at the table. Catherine glanced back. She's going to run. I know. But I made sure she knows she can't run far. Miranda Cunningham did run. But Arthur had anticipated this. During their conversation, Catherine had placed a tracker in Miranda's purse, a small device that would lead the FBI right to her. What Arthur hadn't anticipated was Miranda's desperation. That evening, Arthur and Catherine were at home when Preston called. Arthur, Miranda Cunningham just made a statement on social media. She's claiming Calvin orchestrated his own kidnapping for attention. She's saying Preston abused his power, that the whole trial was corrupt. It's a last play, Arthur said. She's trying to poison the jury pool, create reasonable doubt for appeal. It's working. The story is everywhere. My phone won't stop ringing. Media, colleagues, political enemies. She's destroying my reputation. Arthur thought quickly. Miranda was playing dirty, using the court of public opinion. But she'd made a mistake. She was still in play, still making moves. And people who made moves left trails. Judge, do you still have access to the trial evidence? Yes, but send me everything. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement. Catherine and I are going to tell a different story. Catherine was already at her laptop. I'll contact my old editor at the Tribune. If we can give them an exclusive with proof of Miranda's coordination, we can turn this around. They worked through the night. Arthur compiled evidence, financial records showing Miranda's payments to the kidnappers, phone records proving she directed the operation, even security footage from the Driscoll showing her meeting with Wallace Fry. Catherine wrote the story, her journalist training making it compelling and unassailable. By dawn, the Tribune published, The Real Mastermind, How Miranda Cunningham Orchestrated Her Own Father's Revenge. The article was devastating. It included proof of Miranda's coordination, her attempts to intimidate witnesses, and her meeting with a corrupt DEA agent. Public opinion shifted immediately, but Miranda had one more move. At 7 a.m., Arthur's phone rang from an unknown number. Miranda's voice was raw with rage. "You've destroyed everything. My father, my brother, me. I'm going to make you pay." "Where are you, Miranda?" "Somewhere you can't touch me. But I can touch what you love. Your wife, Catherine Hart, teaches at Johnson High School, doesn't she? And Judge Hastings lives at 1847 Greenbrier. And you, Arthur Hart, live at—" "Enough," Arthur said coldly. "You're making threats you can't keep. Try me. I have nothing left to lose." The line went dead. Arthur turned to Catherine, his face grim. "She knows where we live. She knows your school. She's desperate enough to try anything." Catherine grabbed her phone. "I'll call the school, have them locked down. You call Preston." But Arthur was already thinking tactically. Miranda was cornered, and cornered animals were dangerous. But they were also predictable. She'd go for the most visible, most painful target first. "She won't go for us," Arthur said. "She'll go for Preston. She needs a statement, something that proves she still has power. She'll try to finish what her father started." They raced to the Hastings estate. Arthur called Agent Grimes en route. "Miranda Cunningham is planning an attack on Judge Hastings. We need protection now. We're already mobilizing. Stay away, Mr. Hart. This is law enforcement business." But Arthur knew better. By the time law enforcement mobilized, Miranda could have already acted. He had to get there first. They arrived at the estate to find it eerily quiet. Too quiet. Arthur's instincts screamed danger. He pulled his truck around back, approaching through the garden he'd tended for 3 years. The roses were in bloom, just as he'd predicted. The irony wasn't lost on him. Returning to the garden as a warrior instead of a gardener. Catherine gripped his arm. "Arthur, look." Calvin's BMW was parked crookedly in the driveway, driver's door open. Fresh tire marks scarred the lawn, and the front door was ajar. Arthur moved fast, Catherine following. Inside, they found signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, a broken vase. Preston's study door was closed, but light leaked from underneath. Arthur tried the handle. Locked. He could hear voices inside. "You should have left my father alone," Miranda's voice, shaking with emotion. "You should have looked the other way, like every other judge we paid off. But you had to be the hero. Killing me won't save your father." Preston's voice was steady despite his fear. "No, but it will hurt. Just like you hurt my family." Arthur made a decision. He stepped back and kicked the door, his Legion training making the breach explosive. The heavy wood splintered around the lock, and he burst through. Miranda stood behind Preston's desk, gun pressed to the judge's temple. Calvin was tied to a chair in the corner, a repeat of his earlier captivity. But this time, Miranda was alone, desperate, cornered, and dangerous. "Arthur Hart," Miranda said. "The hero gardener. I was hoping you'd show up." "Let them go, Miranda. It's over." "Over." She laughed hysterically. "It's over when I say it's over. My father built an empire. 30 years of work. And this man destroyed it with a gavel." "Your father destroyed himself," Arthur said calmly, moving slowly into the room. Catherine stayed in the doorway, her phone recording everything. He chose violence. He chose to hurt people. Preston just held him accountable. Accountable? Miranda's gun hand shook. "You don't know what it's like. My whole life, people looked at me like I was dirt. Cartel trash, they called me. But my father gave me purpose. He made me powerful. And you took that away." Arthur saw the pain beneath the rage. A woman who'd built her identity around her father's empire, who'd never learned to be anything else. But sympathy didn't change what needed to happen. "Miranda, look at me." Arthur's voice softened, shifted. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to be you. But I know what it's like to be defined by violence. I spent years of my life as a weapon. And you know what I learned? Violence only defines you if you let it. Easy for you to say. You got out. You got your quiet life, your garden." Miranda's eyes glistened with tears. "I can't get out. This is all I am." "That's not true. But if you pull that trigger, then yes, this becomes all you are. Forever." For a moment, Miranda's gun lowered slightly. Arthur saw the opening, but he didn't take it. This wasn't a moment for tactics. This was a moment that required something else, understanding. "My wife once told me," Arthur continued, "that every person is more than their worst moment. You've done terrible things, but you can also choose to stop. Right now, that choice is still yours." Miranda looked at Preston, then at Calvin, then back at Arthur. If I stop, I go to prison. Life, probably. Yes. And that's supposed to be better than this? Yes. Because in prison, you're still alive. Still capable of change. Still human. Pull that trigger, and you become exactly what people called you. Prove them wrong instead. Miranda's hand trembled. The gun slowly lowered. Arthur moved forward carefully, extending his hand. Give me the gun, Miranda. For a moment, it seemed like she would. Her hand reached out, the weapon pointed at the floor. Arthur was 3 feet away, then 2. The front door exploded inward. FBI agents stormed the house, weapons drawn. Drop the weapon. Now. Miranda's eyes went wide with panic. The gun swung back up, and Arthur saw her finger tighten on the trigger. He had a split second to choose, his safety or Preston's life. He chose. Arthur lunged forward, putting himself between Miranda and Preston. The gun fired. The bullet caught Arthur in the shoulder, spinning him. But his momentum carried him into Miranda, knocking the gun from her hand. They crashed to the floor together, and FBI agents swarmed them. Catherine screamed. Agents pulled Arthur away, and medics were suddenly there, applying pressure to his shoulder. Through the pain and chaos, Arthur saw Agent Grimes cuff Miranda, who was sobbing now, all the fight gone out of her. Arthur, Preston knelt beside him. Why would you? You're welcome, Arthur managed, grimacing. Just don't fire me for bleeding on your carpet. 3 weeks later, Arthur was back in the garden. His shoulders still ached, and the doctor said he'd have limited mobility for months. But his hands worked well enough for pruning. The roses had fully bloomed, blood red against green leaves. Arthur trimmed them carefully, his movements still precise despite the injury. Catherine sat on a nearby bench, reading student essays but watching him more than the papers. You know you're supposed to be resting, she said. This is resting. This is you being stubborn. Preston emerged from the house with Calvin. The judge looked better. The weight of fear and crisis lifted from his shoulders. Calvin looked different too. The spoiled teenager had been replaced by someone more thoughtful, more aware of his mortality and privilege. Arthur, a moment? Preston asked. They walked through the garden together. Calvin hung back, giving them space. Preston stopped at the rose bushes. These are magnificent. Thank you. Arthur, I owe you everything. You saved my son. You saved me. And you nearly died doing it. Part of the job. No, Preston said firmly. It wasn't. You're a gardener. You didn't have to become a soldier again. But you did, for us. Arthur considered this. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I could use those skills for something good. That I wasn't just a destroyer. You're a builder, Preston said. Look at this garden. You created something beautiful. And then you protected it. Calvin approached hesitantly. Arthur, I wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I treated you. I thought you were just the help. But you're a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who knows how to handle problems. Well, you handled ours. Calvin smiled awkwardly. And I'm enrolling in community college instead of a party school. Going to study horticulture, actually. Thought you could use an assistant. I mean, if you'll have me. Arthur looked at the kid, really looked at him. There was potential there, underneath the privilege. Maybe some good could grow from all this violence. I could use help with the East Terrace, Arthur said. It's backbreaking work. I'll do it. Agent Grimes arrived at the estate shortly after. She had news. Miranda Cunningham had accepted a plea deal. Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony had brought down what remained of the Cunningham organization, including a dozen corrupt officials. She asked me to give you something, Grimes said, handing Arthur an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. You were right. I was more than my worst moment. Thank you for showing me that before it was too late. Miranda. Arthur folded the note and put it in his pocket. Catherine took his hand. How do you feel? Tired. Ready for quiet again. Think you'll get it? I think so. This was an exception, not a return to old ways. Preston invited them to dinner. Arthur, Catherine, Calvin, and a few close friends. It was supposed to be a celebration, but it felt more like a wake for the violence that had consumed them all. During dinner, Preston stood with a glass of wine. I want to propose a toast. To Arthur Hart, who reminded me that justice isn't just about laws and verdicts. Sometimes it's about one person standing up and saying, not on my watch. You saved my son, Arthur. You saved my family. And you did it with honor. To Arthur, everyone echoed. Arthur raised his glass, but felt Catherine's hand squeeze his under the table. She understood. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was survival to be grateful for. After dinner, Arthur and Catherine walked through the garden under moonlight. The estate was peaceful again, the violence just a memory held in the soil beneath their feet. "Are you really done?" Catherine asked. "If someone else needed help." "I'm a gardener," Arthur said. "But gardeners defend their gardens when they have to." That's all this was. "You're more than a gardener, Arthur Hart." "Maybe, but a gardener is enough for me." He looked at the roses, at the life he'd built with Catherine, at the peace he'd fought so hard to maintain. The French Foreign Legion had taught him to be a weapon. The garden had taught him to be a builder. And this crisis had taught him that sometimes you needed to be both. But now, standing in the moonlight with dirt under his fingernails and his wife beside him, Arthur Hart was content to be simply this: a man who tended growing things and protected what mattered. The roses would bloom again next season. He would be there to see them grow. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.